Welcome back, and this lesson we need to do something with the data that's being returned back. So it looks like we're getting 10 items and we're getting an array with variations here. So the top one here just tells us back our search term and some additional terms to search for. The next one gives us some information for those terms. And then lastly, we've got the links to find out more details about those terms. So we can make use of all of this data. And what we want to do is we want to loop through all four of these different items here that are contained within the array. And then from these arrays, let's just grab the first item, so whatever the index 0 is. So that's what we want to output on our page. And this is a little bit of a challenge, but what I want you to do is think about how we can loop through this array, get all of this information, and then output it within our web page. So let's open up our editor and jump in and start doing some JavaScript coding. So I can get rid of these console logs, and over here, so this is where we're actually returning back that response information from that function that we created. So this is where we ideally want to do something with that data. And also, in preparation for output, let's set that object up as well. So document, and we can use query selector. We could also use get element by ID. So I'm going to grab output. And when you're using query selector, make sure that if it's an ID, you use the hash. If it's a class, you use the dot. If it's just a tag name, then you just use the regular tag name. And we do want to capture that entire element content in an object so that we can output that information directly on our web page. So now that we're getting a response here, we need to loop through that response. So let's do something with that. We'll use a for loop. Let's set up variable x and in response. Console log out these values before we try to place that on our web page. And we're going to console log out the value of x. So x response. So we know that this is an array. And we've got a number of array items, so by index, and x is going to serve as the index value. Or we can first, let's just output x so that you can see what this is going to look like. And before we go out there, we got to make sure that we're outputting response. So let's try that out. So refresh, search, and we see we've got the index value. So x is essentially just the index value. So this is the same thing that we would get if we did the for loop, so variable x equals 0, increment x by 1 every time we iterate through a different item. So this, we know that if we do response, so I missed out that s there, and we use x as our index value, and we refresh, we get all of this information coming out. So these are arrays as well, and we only want to return back maybe that first item that's available within that array. So we see that we get 3 different arrays and we've got JavaScript there. So let's try this out now. And because these are all arrays, so the format is fairly standard and we just want to grab the first one, we get JavaScript, we get information about JavaScript and the link. And notice we've got a problem here with the first one because this one wasn't in an array format. And you're going to get this sometimes when you're working with different APIs that you've got to massage it a little bit and just make it work. So we know that if x is 0, then we just grab the value of x. So we see that that's not going to work. So let's try a few different things. So we can do length. We need a way to distinguish the different streams. So we see that when we do length, they all come back as 10. What if we do type of response x, so refresh. And we see the first one's a string. The other 3 are objects. So that will work. So now we can form a condition around it. So we found our way to distinguish the two. So let's create a variable, call it holder. And we're going to do a ternary operator. So we're going to check to see if the type of is string. And if this is true, then what we want to do, let me open this up bigger. So if the type of is string, then what we want to do with it is we're fine with it. We don't have to get the first item there. So we're just going to return back response of x. And if it's not the string, then we want to grab that first item in the array. And then let's output holder just to make sure that everything is good before we try to output it again into our web page. So let's go back out, refresh, search for JavaScript. So our first one is JavaScript. Second one is returning back information. And we see that those two first ones are the same actually. So we don't even need to make use of that first one. So we could just completely skip it altogether, or we could append it to our HTML. So there's a number of different options here at this point. So let's go ahead and we'll keep that one. And we could also do a loop starting at 1 if we are sure that we're not returning back anything of value. But let's keep it this way. And then of course you can update it as needed. So we're ready to output some content. We've set up our output element, which is all ready to receive that information. I'm going to clean this up a bit so it's a little bit more readable. So over here, this is where we're calling our function. We're getting our response content. We're looping through that response content. And if it's a string value, then we're just returning it as is. If it's an array or if it's an object, then we're grabbing that first item by the index. And then we're just outputting in holder. So we are ready to make some updates. So first of all, let's do output inner HTML and make this big. We'll do H2. And we know what the search term is because we've got search term that we're grabbing from the input. So we can just use that variable holder that we've created, inner HTML, and we're going to concatenate it together with whatever is already existing there. So that search term will be there. And we can add in our content because we know that this is all within a string format. And div. So there we go. And we can also add in a class if we want. So if we wanted to return it in some type of different nice format, make it look different or make it look better. So we can use a class as well. And we'll call it output, data output. And we can go up to our style and let's add some styling there. So padding, 10 pixels, border, and make it fairly light. Let's see what this looks like now. So go back out, refresh. And now we should get some content being shown over here. So there we go. So search term JavaScript, we get JavaScript, information about JavaScript, and the URL to link to that. So great, we are ready to move on to our next step, and that's going to be hooking up YouTube. So we ultimately want all of this to show up, and then down below, let's show up 4 links to videos. We're going to just use the thumbnails that are returned back from YouTube. So now I want you to build this out within your own application, try it out, make sure it's working, make sure that you're able to get that response information, and then output it within your HTML page. So coming up is YouTube, and that's going to be really exciting.